My name is Isabella Cross. I'm 35 years old. The night that changed everything wasn't when I infiltrated the Sinaloa cartel or when I spent 6 months undercover in a Colombian cocaine lab. It was standing in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, crystal chandeliers casting golden light across 300 wedding guests, watching my father raise his champagne glass and destroy me with 6 words. "She's just a low-level agent." The laughter that followed hit like shrapnel. My sister glowed in her designer gown while Dad painted me as the family's consolation prize, the daughter who couldn't quite measure up to expectations. Behind his practiced smile, I saw 35 years of disappointment crystallized into a single devastating moment. They thought they knew who I was. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they'd been. I was 8 years old the first time I realized my father had 2 different voices for his children. The first voice, warm, proud, full of possibility, was reserved for my older brother Marcus and my twin sister Elena. "Marcus is going to be a doctor," he'd tell neighbors, his chest swelling with anticipation. "Elena's got the brains for law school, just like her old man." The second voice, cautious, conditional, laced with doubt, was mine alone. Isabella's. "Well, she's trying," he'd say when people asked about me, like I was a charity case he was reluctantly supporting. "We'll see what happens." I learned early that my father measured worth in achievements he could brag about at dinner parties. Marcus's acceptance to Harvard Medical School, Elena's partnership track at a white shoe law firm. Success that came with prestige, recognition, and paychecks impressive enough to discuss in polite company. My career choice, if you could even call it that at 18, didn't fit his narrative of success. Law enforcement? His voice carried the same tone he'd used when I'd announced I wanted to be a veterinarian at age 6, amused tolerance for a child's unrealistic fantasy. "Isabella, sweetheart, you're too soft for that world. Too naive. You cried during dog food commercials." I was standing in our kitchen in Westchester, acceptance letter from the DEA Academy in my hands, watching him process the idea that his sensitive daughter wanted to chase drug dealers for a living. "Besides," he continued, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal, "federal agents make what, $60,000 a year? You could make that managing a Gap store." What he didn't say, what he never said, was that he was proud of me for getting accepted into one of the most competitive training programs in federal law enforcement. That beating out 12,000 other applicants meant something, that maybe his youngest daughter wasn't as soft as he'd assumed. The DEA Academy at Quantico was 18 weeks of hell designed to separate the agents from the wannabes. Physical training that left my body screaming. Firearms qualification where missing your target meant starting over. Scenario-based exercises where split-second decisions determined whether you lived or died. I threw myself into it with the desperation of someone who had something to prove. Not to my instructors, they treated everyone equally, with the kind of professional brutality that either forged you into steel or broke you completely. Not to my fellow trainees, who were too focused on their own survival to worry about mine. I was proving something to a man who'd spent 18 years making me feel like I wasn't enough. Graduation day, I stood in my dress blues with a badge that represented 18 weeks of blood, sweat, and determination. My family sat in the third row, Dad checking his phone, Mom trying to look proud, Marcus and Elena whispering about something more interesting than their sister's achievement. When the ceremony ended, Dad shook my hand like I was a business acquaintance. "Congratulations, Isabella. Now let's see if you can handle the real world." The real world, as it turned out, was a 12-year journey through assignments that would have broken the man who doubted me. Undercover work in Miami, infiltrating cocaine distribution networks, surveillance operations in El Paso, tracking cartel money across the border, deep cover assignments in Colombia, where speaking with the wrong accent could get you killed. I lived in studio apartments with bulletproof windows, drove cars with hidden cameras, and carried weapons I prayed I'd never have to use. My phone number changed every 6 months. My identity shifted with each assignment. My real life existed in the spaces between operations, in safe houses and debriefing rooms where nobody asked about my feelings or wondered if I was too soft for the job. Meanwhile, my siblings built the kind of lives Dad could brag about at country club dinners. Marcus opened his cardiology practice on the Upper East Side, complete with a waiting room that looked like a 5-star hotel lobby. Elena made partner at her firm before 35, specializing in corporate mergers that made headlines in the financial press. And me? At family gatherings, I was introduced as Isabella. She works for the government. Not a federal agent, not someone who'd spent a decade dismantling criminal organizations. Just someone who worked for the government, like I processed passport applications or answered phones at the DMV. What exactly do you do? Distant relatives would ask at holiday parties, their voices carrying that particular tone of polite disinterest reserved for careers that didn't involve prestige or impressive salaries. Investigations, I'd say, keeping it vague. Paperwork, mostly. It wasn't entirely a lie. There was paperwork involved in building cases that sent cartel leaders to federal prison for life. Mountains of it. Surveillance reports, financial records, witness statements, evidence logs, the unglamorous foundation that supported every high-profile arrest that made the evening news. But let them think I pushed papers in a cubicle. It was easier than explaining that their boring government employee had spent the previous month infiltrating a fentanyl distribution network that was killing teenagers across 3 states. The silence became my armor. While Marcus posted surgical success stories on Instagram and Elena shared photos from law firm galas, my social media accounts sat empty. No pictures from crime scenes, no celebration posts after major arrests, no glimpses into a world where my decisions affected national security. In my family's eyes, I was the daughter who'd chosen stability over ambition, safety over success. The one who'd taken the easy path of government employment while her siblings conquered private sector mountains. They had no idea that easy was the last word anyone would use to describe my life. Dad's disappointment in my career choice had crystallized into a casual dismissal that followed me through every family gathering. Christmas dinners where he'd spend an hour discussing Marcus's latest surgical technique, then ask me how the office was treating me. Easter brunches where Elena's latest legal victory dominated conversation while my contributions were met with polite nods and subject changes. Isabella's always been practical, he'd tell people. Like practicality was a consolation prize for children who couldn't achieve real success. Government work is steady, good benefits. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I learned to smile and nod, to play the role of the dependable daughter who'd chosen security over dreams. It was simpler than trying to explain why I'd spent the last decade living a double life, why I couldn't talk about my work, why the woman they saw at dinner tables was just one of many identities I wore to stay alive. The truth was, I'd stopped trying to earn his pride somewhere around year 5, when I realized that nothing I accomplished would ever compete with Marcus's medical degree or Elena's legal partnerships. My work would always be invisible, my achievements classified, my sacrifices unrecognized. But late at night, alone in whatever safe house or surveillance vehicle I called home that week, I'd remember that 8-year-old girl who'd wanted nothing more than to hear pride in her father's voice when he talked about her. And I'd wonder if proving him wrong was worth living a lie for the rest of my life. Then my sister announced her engagement, and everything changed. The case that would define my entire career started with a name whispered in a Phoenix parking garage at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Eduardo Vasquez, my informant said, his voice barely audible over the desert wind rattling chain-link fences. He's not just moving product, he's the architect. I'd been chasing shadows for 8 months, fragments of intelligence, half-finished surveillance reports, financial transactions that led nowhere. Suddenly, I was holding the thread that connected a fentanyl pipeline stretching from Sinaloa to Seattle, a network responsible for flooding American cities with poison that was killing 40,000 people a year. The weight of that moment hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just another case file. This was the opportunity to dismantle an empire worth $3 billion that had been operating with impunity for nearly a decade. What my family saw as my boring government job was about to become the most complex undercover operation in DEA history. The next 6 months consumed my life in ways that would have terrified the people who thought I was too soft for law enforcement. I became Sofia Martinez, a money launderer with connections in Miami's financial district. New identity, new backstory, new personality, everything calculated to gain access to Vasquez's inner circle. The cover required me to live in a luxury condo in Coral Gables, driving a BMW and wearing designer clothes that cost more than my actual monthly salary. To my family, it probably looked like I'd finally gotten a promotion. If only they knew the BMW was wired with enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small city. and the designer clothes concealed body armor and a recording device that could get me killed if discovered. My days were spent in boardrooms with men who discussed murder like stock portfolios, who calculated human suffering and profit margins. My nights were spent in restaurants and clubs, laughing at jokes that made my skin crawl, building relationships with people who would put a bullet in my head without hesitation if they suspected who I really was. The psychological toll was unlike anything I'd experienced in 12 years of federal service. I'd wake up each morning and spend 20 minutes in the mirror, transforming Isabella Cross into Sofia Martinez, different posture, different accent, different everything. The woman my father had dismissed as too naive was becoming an Oscar-worthy actress whose performance meant the difference between life and death. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with family texts that felt like messages from another planet. "When are you going to get a real job like Marcus?" Mom wrote while I was sitting in a Miami warehouse watching Vasquez's lieutenants discuss the logistics of moving 2 tons of fentanyl through Long Beach. "Dad's worried you're wasting your life in government work," Elena texted, as I was memorizing the faces of cartel enforcer who'd killed 3 federal witnesses in the past year. The disconnect was so surreal it would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. They thought I was filing paperwork while I was literally risking my life to keep drugs out of their suburban neighborhoods. The operation reached its breaking point on a humid Thursday night in August. We'd tracked a major shipment to a warehouse in Hialeah, intelligence suggesting it was the largest single movement of fentanyl in U.S. history. The plan was surgical: get in, gather evidence, get out. Simple. Nothing went according to plan. The warehouse was supposed to be empty except for 2 guards. Instead, we walked into a meeting of 15 cartel members, including Vasquez himself. My cover was blown 30 seconds after we arrived when one of the guards recognized me from a previous operation. "Dee! She's a fucking Fed!" he screamed, and suddenly the warehouse exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from every direction. I dove behind a shipping container as bullets sparked off concrete around me, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My backup was 2 minutes away, 2 minutes that felt like 2 hours when you're pinned down by automatic weapons. That's when training took over. The discipline my father swore I'd never have, the mental toughness he'd dismissed as weakness, the ability to function under pressure that he'd claimed I didn't possess. I counted muzzle flashes, calculated angles, and coordinated with my team through my earpiece while bullets chewed up the concrete inches from my head. My voice was steady, professional, giving directions that would save lives and preserve evidence that represented months of work. Eagle 1. We have 15 subjects, armed and dangerous. I need tactical units on the north entrance, snipers on the warehouse roof. We cannot let Vasquez escape. The firefight lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, we had 14 arrests, including Vasquez and his entire leadership structure. 2 tons of fentanyl that would never reach American streets. Financial records that would unravel the entire West Coast distribution network. The biggest drug bust in DEA history. But as I sat in the back of an ambulance getting treated for a graze wound on my shoulder, as federal agents processed the largest fentanyl seizure ever recorded, as reporters began arriving to cover a story that would dominate headlines for weeks, all I could think about was a text I'd received that morning. "Hope you're not working late again," Dad had written. "Maybe it's time to consider a career change. Something with more potential." More potential. While he was questioning my life choices from his golf course, I was dismantling criminal organizations that threatened national security. The operation remained classified for 3 more months while we rolled up the rest of the network. 3 months where I continued to be Isabella. She works for the government at family gatherings. 3 months where Dad continued to suggest I should consider law school or business school, anything that might give me a real career. 3 months where I sat at dinner tables listening to him praise Marcus's latest surgical technique and Elena's newest corporate client, while the woman they dismissed as a low-level paper pusher had just led the most significant counter-narcotics operation in American history. The irony was almost too perfect. The daughter he'd said was too soft for law enforcement had proven tough enough to survive a gunfight with cartel killers. The woman he'd claimed lacked discipline had orchestrated an investigation that required the mental fortitude of a chess grandmaster. The child he'd dismissed as naive had outsmarted criminal masterminds who'd been evading capture for years. But nobody knew. Not yet. Elena's wedding was scheduled for the second weekend in October, just days before the DEA planned to go public with the Vasquez case. As I stood in the bridal suite helping her into her dress, listening to her talk about her successful life and perfect future, I carried the weight of secrets that would redefine everything they thought they knew about me. "I'm so proud of you," Elena said, adjusting her veil in the mirror. "You found your own path, even if it's not glamorous." Not glamorous. If she only knew that her boring sister had spent the morning in a classified briefing with the Attorney General discussing how to present the biggest drug bust in history to the American public. As we walked down to the ballroom where 300 guests waited to celebrate Elena's perfect life, I wondered if they'd ever understand that the woman they'd underestimated for 35 years had just proven herself in ways they'd never imagined. In 6 hours, Dad would raise his glass and deliver the toast that would change everything. In 24 hours, the whole world would know exactly who Isabella Cross really was. The Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across 300 guests in black tie and designer gowns. Elena looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang dress, every inch the perfect bride Dad had always envisioned. The string quartet played softly as waiters moved between tables carrying champagne flutes that caught the light like liquid diamonds. I sat at table 12, 2 rows back from the family section, strategically positioned behind a towering centerpiece of white roses and baby's breath. The invisible daughter, placed just far enough from the spotlight to remain unnoticed but close enough to witness the celebration of real success. Marcus sat at the head table with his wife, and their 2 perfect children, his Harvard Medical School ring gleaming as he gestured animatedly about his latest surgical breakthrough. Elena's new husband, a partner at Goldman Sachs, held court with stories about multi-million-dollar deals that would dominate Monday morning's financial headlines. And then there was me, wearing a simple black dress from Nordstrom Rack, carrying secrets that would redefine national security policy while everyone assumed I'd spent the evening processing paperwork at some forgettable government office. Dad stood up as dessert was being served, tapping his champagne flute with a silver knife. The conversations died instantly. All eyes turned to the man who'd spent 35 years perfecting the art of public speaking, whose closing arguments had won cases that made headlines, who could command a room with nothing more than his presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly across the ballroom, "tonight we celebrate not just a marriage, but the culmination of dreams realized through hard work and determination." He gestured toward the head table where Elena glowed in the spotlight she'd been born to occupy. "My daughter Elena represents everything this family stands for: excellence, ambition, the courage to reach for the highest possible achievements. Harvard Law Review, youngest partner in her firm's history, a woman who proves that with enough drive, anything is possible." The applause was warm, genuine, filled with the kind of respect that comes from witnessing undeniable success. "And Marcus," Dad continued, his chest swelling with pride, "my son, the doctor, who saves lives every day and carries on a tradition of service that makes us all proud." More applause. More beaming faces turned toward the golden children who'd fulfilled every parental dream. Then his eyes found me, and I felt my stomach clench with familiar dread. "Of course, we can't forget Isabella," he said, his tone shifting just enough that everyone in the room sensed the change in temperature. "My youngest daughter, who chose a different path." The pause stretched like a held breath. I could feel eyes turning toward me, 300 pairs of them, waiting for the punchline they could sense coming. "She's just a low-level agent," Dad said, his smirk carrying across crystal glasses and champagne bubbles. "Government work. Not quite what we hoped for, but someone has to do those jobs, right?" The laughter that followed hit me like a physical blow. Polite, pitying laughter that said, "Thank God that's not my daughter." I felt heat crawl up my neck as whispers rippled through the ballroom, the same whispers that had followed me through every family gathering for the past 12 years. My hands clenched into fists beneath the tablecloth. 35 years of this. 35 years of being the consolation prize, the daughter who'd chosen security over ambition, safety over success. I wanted to scream. Wanted to stand up and tell them exactly who I was, what I'd done, what I'd survived while they were celebrating achievements that looked impressive on paper but had never saved a single life. But I stayed silent, because silence had always been my weapon, my shield, my survival mechanism, in a world where showing emotion was considered weakness. That's when it happened. Phones started buzzing. First one, then a dozen, then half the room was reaching for devices that were lighting up with notifications. Whispers spread like wildfire, urgent, confused whispers that cut through the wedding's elegant atmosphere like a knife through silk. A waiter near the kitchen entrance was staring at a small television mounted in the corner, the one they used to monitor news during events. The screen had switched from background music videos to the sharp red graphics of breaking news. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CNN anchor's voice carried clearly across the sudden quiet, "we're getting word of a major development in federal law enforcement. The DEA has just announced the largest drug bust in United States history." My blood turned to ice water. Number. Not here. Not now. Not in front of them. The operation, led by Special Agent Isabella Cross, resulted in the seizure of over $2 billion in narcotics and the arrest of 15 high-ranking cartel members, including Eduardo Vasquez, one of the most wanted drug lords in the Western Hemisphere. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. 300 people frozen in place, champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. My picture filled the screen. Not a casual family photo, but my official DEA portrait, the one taken after my promotion to Special Agent in Charge, where I was wearing my dress uniform with 13 years of commendations visible on my chest. Agent Cross, a 12-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration, spent 6 months undercover to infiltrate what officials are calling the most sophisticated narcotics operation ever discovered on American soil. The camera switched to footage from the warehouse raid. Grainy, handheld video that showed me directing tactical units, coordinating with helicopters, making decisions that had dismantled a criminal empire worth $3 billion. The operation prevented an estimated 40,000 pounds of fentanyl from reaching American streets, potentially saving thousands of lives and dealing a crippling blow to cartel operations throughout the Southwest. Every head in that ballroom turned toward Table 12. 300 pairs of eyes found me sitting behind the white roses, the woman who'd just been dismissed as a low-level paper pusher while CNN described her as the agent who'd led the most significant drug bust in federal history. Dad's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, crystals shattering against the marble floor in a spray of golden liquid that caught the chandelier light like scattered stars. His face had gone completely white. The same man who'd spent the last 35 years explaining why I wasn't good enough, why I'd never amount to anything, why I was too soft for the real world, was staring at me like I was someone he'd never seen before. Which, in a way, was exactly right. The Attorney General is calling Agent Cross's work a masterpiece of federal law enforcement, crediting her tactical brilliance and undercover skills with preventing what could have been the largest influx of deadly narcotics in American history. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Elena's mouth was hanging open like a broken door. Around the ballroom, wedding guests were frantically searching their phones for more information about the woman they'd just watched get mocked for her low-level government job. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in that room focus on me with the kind of attention usually reserved for celebrities or criminals. The same woman who'd been sitting in the shadows 5 minutes earlier was now the center of a media storm that would dominate headlines for weeks. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I think I should take this call." As I walked toward the exit, my phone ringing with what I knew was my supervisor calling about the media response, I heard Dad's voice behind me, broken, desperate, completely stripped of the confidence that had defined him for 67 years. "Isabella, wait." I didn't. We didn't know. I paused at the ballroom entrance and turned back to look at this man who'd shaped every insecurity I'd ever carried, who'd made me feel invisible for 35 years, who'd just publicly dismissed the most significant achievement of my career. "No, Dad," I said, and for the first time in my life, my voice carried the authority that came from 12 years of life and death decisions. "You didn't know. Because you never bothered to ask." As I walked out of that ballroom, leaving behind 300 people who were finally seeing me for who I really was, I felt something I'd never experienced in my father's presence. Not vindication, not anger, not even satisfaction. I felt free. The daughter they'd underestimated had just proven herself on a stage bigger than any family gathering. The woman they'd dismissed as too soft had dismantled criminal organizations that would make their worst nightmares look like bedtime stories. And the best part? This was just the beginning. Isabella's story reminds us that real strength often works in silence, that true achievement doesn't always come with applause, and that the most powerful people in the room are often the ones everyone overlooks. Pass this story to someone who's been dismissed, overlooked, or told they're not enough. Sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows, done by people who never ask for credit but change the world anyway. Tap like if you believe silence can be power. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories of resilience and strength. And let's talk in the comments. Would you forgive the people who mocked you? Or would you walk away, free at last?